You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and now it's time for the Paranormal Peep Show.
Hi, welcome to the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network with myself, Neil Ward, and returning is Andy Chaplin. Andy, welcome back, and how are you?
Pretty good, Neil. I'm fully dosed up on all the spiced pumpkin soup that you mentioned in the last episode that I watched with Ben Emlyn Jones, and he did a very good job on that. I've had an absolutely crazy manic Halloween. It seems like ages since we last spoke. But I've just been going here, there and everywhere. And much as I love Halloween, I'm kind of glad it's all over now because I've been doing events. I've been doing zombie things, scare mazes, and having fun with a wonderful girl that's entered my life called Bunny. I won't mention her full name, but nickname Bunny. And yeah, we're just kind of going here, there and everywhere. And that should be an interesting future because we've got a few plans ahead of us.
Oh, excellent. Oh, well, good luck with that. Yeah, Ben mentioned something about being loved up or something. The words he chose. But yeah, Ben did a great job co-hosting, but I expected him to because he's naturally a very good guest anyway, and he's always got a lot to talk about. And one thing that really kind of always gets me with Ben is that he comes out with this whole multitudes of words that I've never heard before. And he just plucks them from the ether, and I'm thinking, God damn, what does that mean?
Like what? Give us an example.
Oh, I can't remember. He just comes over with like certain words. Like I just can't remember. I'd have to review it and write it down. It's lots of scientific-y stuff, you know. And it really sort of bends my brain a bit. I'm thinking, what the hell does that mean? You know. But yeah, he's very good. He can hold his own on those sorts of discussions. And Ben's. This is why we have Ben on regularly because he's such a good guest and also a good equally co-host. And he also obviously he hosts our Apollo Detectives and. We've just done a recent episode of that, actually, which I'm in the middle of editing now. So that's where we had Jarrell White talking with a shuttle astronaut, which was an interesting debate. So I'll put the link in the description under our show for this one if anyone wants to watch that. So, yeah, you've had a good Halloween then. So you're coming swinging around into the Christmas mode now. So you've been busy with your psychic evenings and things?
Yeah, doing a lot of psychic events here, there and everywhere. It's kind of winding down now a little bit. And funnily enough, Neil, close to us in a town called Hoddesdon, or close to me, there's a theatre there that's going to be doing Most Haunted Live, the stage show. Now, this was hugely controversial. I mean, I got into the whole psychic thing kind of sort of late 90s, early 2000s, and that was when Derek Acora was doing a show called Predictions on Sky, and when Most Haunted first came out and was very kind of like rudimentary in the beginning. And back in the very, very first episodes, it was actually quite good. I thought Most Haunted was kind of fairly balanced and fairly decent. It then became controversial, didn't it? Because there was accusations of faking it. So as with most things in the kind of media and TV world, it starts off, but then they want it bigger and better and bigger and better and more pizzazz and more wow. And so over time, you'd see Derek Acora kind of getting more possessed, you know, this kind of thing. And it became a little bit of a laughing stock, kind of, and then it sort of faded out, didn't it? And the American shows started coming along like Taps and all that kind of thing. Ghost Hunters with Zach and his crazy hair. But yeah, this Most Haunted Live is coming in around the Spotlight Theatre in Broxbourne. I think it's 19th of November. I'm going to it with a couple of friends of mine. and we're going to see what's going to happen. Apparently, at the end of it, there's going to be a séance.
Oh, fantastic!
It'd be interesting to see if they kind of like say, "Are there any mediums in the audience?" And then if there are, I'll be like, "Me." See what happens. What will be quite interesting as well, because although I'm in the mediumistic kind of like world myself, I do actually have like a skeptics or a scientific hat as well. So I'm going to be trying to spot to see if they're setting anything up or if they've got any shenanigans going on. And if they are, then I will be reporting back.
Wow, maybe you can grab someone for an interview.
That could be interesting.
Yeah. Well, someone who is scientific and with a bit of a mediumistic slant as well is our guest tonight. That's Chris Connelly joining us. Welcome, Chris. Are you there?
Hi, Chris.
I am indeed. Thank you, Neil, Andrew, for the invitation.
Thank you for joining us. So we just heard Andy there talking about the most haunted live on stage, and Andy wonders if there's going to be any kind of rigging of the ghost procedures. Do you think you'd be a guy that would be qualified with your scientific, technical background and mediumistic background to kind of maybe pick up on that sort of stuff?
Well, I kind of hope so. I mean, I think with anything to do with entertainment, there's always an element of, shall we say, make-believe involved. So, as I said, it'll be interesting to see what Andy comes back with.
Yeah. So to give people a bit more information about you, you've got a sort of an engineering science background, haven't you, in the UK space industry?
That's correct. Yes. So I come from a engineering background, 35 years as an engineer, and primarily as a research engineer, designing products for various industries. The last 12 years, it's been the UK space industry, involved with the design of imaging technology for what we call Earth observation missions. And more recently, I'm involved in the writing and the development of software for the missions used on the satellites and on the spacecraft.
Wow.
But yeah, so as a background, well, I also have a background in psychology. I'm about 18 months away, fingers crossed, from completing my doctorate in psychology, where I'm researching the mental processes or the psychology and the cognitive processes used by mediums to commune with the spirit world. You know, my background is really because of the science I'm interested in, is to try and demystify as much as possible mediumship. Because as we was discussing earlier, I'm also a medium for the last 25 years as well. So, you know, I come from it from both perspectives, and it's kind of useful because obviously I've got a lot of willing colleagues and friends who are willing to put themselves through all the trauma and of being involved in the experiments I'm conducting and so forth. Yeah.
So, do you work with people like Dr. Kieran O'Keefe and Chris French and?
They I would say they are more on the skeptic side, but there are a lot of researchers and academics I do work with who, let's just say, I would say are more open-minded about the research. And actually, it was working with a researcher from Northampton University, Professor Chris Rowe, a psychology professor, and a group of his PhD students that encouraged me to actually go on to do a master's in psychology and the PhD, because I realized talking to them that there were things that they were saying, because they'd been researching mediumship for many years. There were things they were saying that they couldn't understand, and from a spiritualist perspective, I could understand, you know, where they were coming from. But I thought, you know, to be able to engage with researchers, you know, I thought it would be good to certainly go and get my own, as soon as it's off the shelf, so to speak, go and get my own PhD, my own doctorate, and so I can understand the perspective they come from and be able to maybe sort of like answer their questions from a spiritualist perspective, you know, from a medium's perspective, and as well at a degree that they would be able to understand and so forth. Yeah.
When you come across kind of like, I suppose, mainstream or skeptical viewpoints regarding mediumship, how can I put this? Is there kind of like a bias or an emphasis for you to go along with it and believe it, or is it a case of you find your own solutions, your own kind of like I don't know what the right word, thesis or something? Do they allow you to free think within your masters and your doctorates, or is it kind of you must think this way, and if you don't, then you're one of those woolly?
Yeah, no. At the end of the day, the doctorate is self-governed by myself,
Right.
And the supervisors that I have, which are from Canterbury Christchurch University in Kent, I've got two supervisors there. One is a member of the Society for Psychical Research, has been a member for many years, and is actually a past editor of their journal. And another supervisor I have is an expert in cognitive psychology. Again, they're there really to support me through the process, so I can understand if like the statistical methods, the research methodologies, and things like that. The actual topic itself, they're interested in and willing to support as we go along. And you'll find, interestingly, that maybe I've just been very fortunate, but, a lot of the researchers and academics I've come across are very supportive of survival. And actually, what people don't realize is there is a humongous amount of literature out there, the research literature in peer-reviewed journals, that actually support that, what mediums claim to be doing. There's absolutely an abundance of literature there.
So what would you say, roughly speaking, within the psychology world, is the percentage of believers versus skeptics?
I wouldn't say believers versus skeptics. You would probably say who would be more willing to be open-minded compared to those that would like to follow the sort of mainstream narrative. And it really comes down to the scientists' worldview. The world. Are they willing to accept that, if they're a realist, they would accept that everything that we see is all there is. I view myself more of a critical realist, where I say, I generally believe there is nothing paranormal. I believe eventually we would understand, because we talk about, mediumship under the field of parapsychology. And I kind of cringe a little bit because para seems to suggest it's not normal, or beyond the normal understanding. And I just think, no, it's just we don't understand it. Mediumship is cross-cultural, across the ages, across time. And so there's nothing abnormal about it. It's just we don't understand it. And I do feel that, as a scientist, I want to say, that it's incumbent upon us to be open-minded to anything. For example, we were talking earlier about did we go to the moon and things like that. And I'm of the mindset we did. But there is, if there was sufficient evidence to suggest we didn't, I can't be a scientist and say, no, that's wrong, if the evidence seems to suggest the alternative. Do you know what I mean? And this is where, it depends on your worldview and whether you are a scientist or whether you're just so engrossed in maybe, shall we say, biases because of agendas that you have that prevent you from being open and mindful of the wider view of things.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think interestingly, it's the similar kind of argument that people like, for instance, Professor Chris French or Dr. Kieran O'Keefe would present, in that people who believe in the paranormal, supernatural, ghost world will always kind of like have a bias looking for evidence that there is something there because that's what they already believe. And so anything that happens, whether a stone is thrown or there's a knock at the glass of the pane of window or something falls off a table, their bias is that it must be supernatural. But that does work the other way. If you've got a predisposition to believe that everything's not in any way supernatural, you will always be looking for the an explanation, even if it's like a bizarre explanation, to rationalize that it must not be paranormal, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. You have this confirmation bias that you will find things that satisfy what you're predisposed to believe, or your beliefs. Absolutely. And and this is where, as scientists, we should be open-minded, and we should be mindful that the evidence, we follow the evidence or follow the data, and not follow our beliefs. And so in my doctorate, I have to be open in the thesis, and say, this is my position. I've got to be open and say, look, I come from it from a spiritualist perspective. I'm assuming the past literature on mediums is accurate, that support mediums and support what we do. And there is an abundance of literature out there that does that. And I have to assume that is correct. But there is a possibility it's not. In the research I'm doing, I had a nice, clear sort of timeline and plan of what I was hoping to achieve. But very quickly in the first set of experiments, I found that the danger didn't support that. And so I had to go off on a tangent and find something else. But that's the whole point of what scientific research is about. It's not saying, I'm going to find this. It's about, I need to be open. I need to conduct experiments because I'm interested in explaining what's going on here. But I can only allow the data to inform my next conclusion or my next experiment, But, you've got to remember that a lot of these academic researchers have jobs. They have positions in respectable sort of universities, and it still isn't a career move to move into the field of parapsychology. In terms of it's not really going to enhance your career. So when you have skeptics, it must be very hard for someone who comes out and says, there is absolutely nothing there. It is all fantasy. It's all wishful thinking on the medium's perspective, or even some of the literature seems to suggest that people who believe in the paranormal or who are mediums have some sort of cognitive deficit. Were basically unable to think scientifically or not unable to think critically. Things like that. And it's like, if you present that and you have that stance, and you create a network of colleagues, a network of friends who then scaffold that position that you're holding, it's got to be difficult for them to change position. Do you know what I mean? And so, it's human nature. It's all human behavior, human nature, and all sort of like the unconscious biases that we try to go through life to try and relieve any possible conflicts, internal conflicts, dissonance, we call it, to stick with the sort of beliefs that fit our worldview.
I'd agree. I mean, the thing is, I entered the kind of like the spiritual and the psychic world probably early 2000 by watching shows like Most Haunted, Predictions, etc. That bumped me off into kind of like or springboarded me off, I should say, into the world of kind of like spiritualism and that kind of thing. However, I've always kept this scientific hat on in terms of, is there another logical explanation? So, for instance, and Neil knows about this one, I had like a shadow man incident where I walked along a canal path, and there was very clearly a human shape, a dark figure with a torso and a head. And it kind of, as I was walking past it, it melted into the fence, into the metal fence. It just melted away. I tried to recreate that. So in the moment, as it happened, obviously this is impossible. It wasn't a physical person because there was nobody there. I tried to recreate it. Because this was twilight. So I tried to recreate it, waiting for a car to come along. There was a road kind of like on the other side of this, and the car headlights made the shadows move kind of through the metal fence. You could see the shadows move. And I was kind of like just shifting my position. Was it kind of like as I was moving, was something else kind of moving at the same time? Was the car headlights doing? And I couldn't recreate it. But the whole point of this is kind of what I was trying to find a logical explanation for what I was seeing, and I couldn't find it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and this is something that the spirit world tell us time and time again. is that if you get a communication, if you have an experience, some sort of phenomena from the spirit world, and you believe it's the spirit world, ask them to replicate it.
That's interesting.
Ask them to replicate it, because if it is the spirit world, they will prove it to you.
Mm.
If it's not, then the chances are it might not happen again. But the spirit world are intelligent. So ask them to try and replicate it again. If it is generally some sort of spirit phenomena that's manifests there.
Mm. Yeah, maybe I
How did you
will.
get into obviously, but you were a skeptical person in the beginning, though, when you got involved in all this, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really think much about it. I mean, since being involved in spiritualism, you speak to family members, and they remind you that that I've always had some type of, shall we say, weirdness, as they like to put it, so to speak. Back when I was a toddler, about four years old, and so forth. But it's one of these things, and that you just you've got to you got to work. You got to go to school. You go to college. You go to uni. You got to work. And that sort of thing. These things you put at the back of your mind and get on with things. But it was just literally a chance visit at our local spiritualist church at Gravesend in North Kent that prompted this whole interest again. And it was rather curious because I got a communication myself from the medium. And I was very skeptical, like you are. I mean, Gravesend Church, as not aware, is like a townhouse. It's like an old Victorian sort of townhouse, and so you go in at the ground, at the ground level, and that's where the church is. They converted upstairs into a flat, and you go downstairs into the basement, and that's the tea room. Well, so you go in and you have this communication with the service and so forth. And I got a communication from a relative, loved one, and I thought, well, that's really kind of cool. So I went down afterwards to speak to the medium, and they sort of like carried the communication on. And it was interesting, because what they were saying was, that basically it was just, I was 24, and they were saying, no, you can do this too. The spirit world is saying you can do this too. So I'm thinking, this is just a recruitment drive. This is just trying to recruit me in as a young 24-year-old. But nevertheless, I went back every week for the service, and I kept a folder, because every week, interestingly, as you all know, there's a different medium serving the church. And every week I got a message from the spirit world for 6 months. Every week I got a message from the spirit world saying, you can do this too. Again, I'm thinking, okay, so this is we're applying this heavy recruitment drive onto you. But every time I used to go home and write up exactly what was said, where I was sitting, who the medium was, and things like that. Just try to lay it all out. Because I was convinced it was, there's some sort of fraudulent activity going on here, and then I realised one time that I thought I understood what was going on, and downstairs, in the tea room, because it's an old sort of townhouse, you have the sort of like the old fireplaces and the alcoves been made into cupboards, and I just thought, well, you've probably got a high-tech CCTV system hidden behind the cupboards there, and you've got microphones upstairs in the church. And I'm thinking to myself, people that are bereaved, they go to church, they're going to talk about their loved ones and so forth. And I just had this picture of this medium sitting downstairs with his CCTV system, listening to conversations upstairs, But anyway, so that's how I got involved. 6 months in, I was eventually invited to sit in circle. Again, I used to turn up half hour earlier so I could set the chairs out, make sure there was no trickery involved. And I think it was week 3, the medium asked me to stand up and give a communication. And I sort of said, like most people, well, how do you do that? And they talked me through it, and here I am today. And that was it. And I decided then, I think, that if I wanted to understand what was going on, that I needed in some way to try and discard or move aside that skeptical element and just sort of like throw myself into it on the basis that at some point I'll revisit this from a scientific perspective, and that's exactly what I've done. So, you know, I've been involved for 25 years, 15 of those, or 10 of those, I'll say, has been now the church services and on my working in the churches has started to tail off, and the research has taken over. But I still feel that I'm guided by spirit in this way. You know what I mean? I don't, you know, I'm not sort of like discarding the spirit world or their inspiration. I still feel very much that this is something that I think the spirit world want me to pursue going forward.
With that in mind, have you had any kind of messages or some sort of confirmation from spirit in some way that says, please do this research or something like that?
I've had bits, yes, from mediums who have not known what I'm doing or not known who I am or what have you, and or my involvement in spiritualism, and who have sort of like given messages that I've understood to be, you know, that this is the route I'm to be taking now. Yeah. I mean, I have to confess, I love serving the churches and my full tooth and nail to try and keep hold of those church services. But as you know, that, you know, if you're on a path where you can't, or, you know, it is what it is, you know. So, but I'm fascinated by the research that I'm conducting and seeing and doing.
And you're looking into trance or something as well, aren't you?
Trance was something that was one of the first areas I was looking into in terms of trying to understand trance. Obviously, we're referring here to spiritualist trance or mediumistic trance, and in particular, it was again what I try to do is understand what's going on. I suppose that comes from the engineering sort of background, you know, and trying to, you know, break, sort of like dismantle something and put things back together again to try and see how it all works. But you know, trance was I thought was quite interesting because there is a lot of myth, superstition, and a lot of strange ideas about trance. And what we find, and what I've found is that with trance is you can't, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but you can't always trust the trance mediums who are teaching trance, because they're only teaching trance from their perspective. And what we find is that what they're aware of, it doesn't always reflect what they're doing. And that's not because they're tricking anybody, it's because that very often, when we've measured, for example, the physiology of trance mediums, and I've measured it using, you know, skin conductance that measures the physiology, the autonomic nervous system, and measured using EEG, using a small sort of Muse headband, we call it a Muse headband, that measures the brainwave activity with mediums. When you ask the trance mediums what they're aware of, it's very often a lot different to what the readings of the physiology of the mediums are saying is happening. You know, so there is this paradox, there's a difference here. So, for example, when, we hear trance mediums talk about the need they go into this very deep state where they're not aware of anything, and they're just not aware in their absence of mind, or they're just going for this deep relaxation, so to speak. We have to differentiate, because what we see in the physiology is, yes, the body is relaxed, quite true, but their mind, their brain activity is completely the opposite. It's a very heightened state of arousal. And it's like, well, you say that to the trance medium, well, actually, you know, your body was relaxed, but your mind was literally buzzing, you know, and they're like, well, that's contra to what they're experiencing. And so this is why I say we've got to be very, I mean, mediums who choose your own trance, I feel, have to be very careful in how they explain trance works, because actually the physiology, the data seems to suggest the opposite of what they're saying. And the reason I did the trance research was I found myself developing trance, and you know, and as you know, as mediums yourself, when you're in a development group and you're working with your mental mediumship, you've got someone in front of you giving you sort of feedback, yes, no, and in a way, you're kind of learning to tune in, and you're sort of like guiding yourself. You know, what's right, what's wrong. You know, you get a sense of, after a while, you get a sense of a feel for when something is right. Yeah. But what I found when I started seeing for trance, you know, I sat there and I closed my eyes. I was aware of the spirit world, and it was like, well, what do I do now? You know, it's like, well, what happens now? You know, and so that's why I did the research, because I wanted to see, well, what is meant to happen? And when I understood that I'm not meant to just be completely unconscious or completely out of it, but actually there's something else going on, that's when I realised that how to sit with trance, and my own trance development sort of like went in leaps and bounds once I realised that.
Is there any sort of specific spirits that you'd be bringing through, or is it a higher self or anything like that?
Oh, well, if it's a higher self, it wouldn't be mediumistic trance. But I do have a so we say influence, or a spirit friend. I like them friends in spirit that come through and communicate. And so yes, there are individuals. I'm not going to name them, but because they've asked not to be named at the moment, but there are individuals that come through.
That's interesting. And so, for the benefit of the audience of hearing the description of a trance for the first time, and obviously there's people listening that are thinking, what the hell are they talking about trance? Can you explain for the benefit of our listeners what in a mediumistic way trance is?
Okay, so when we talk about trance mediumship is a form of mental mediumship. So what we're talking, you see, the thing is, I don't actually agree necessarily with the definitions here as well. But let's explain. Let's go to the traditional explanation of trance mediumship. So we know mediumship is mental mediumship in the sense that the medium conveys the information from the mental impressions that the spirit world give them. And normally that's what you see on a platform or in church and so forth. So we call that perception mediumship, because they're perceiving the spirit world. Trance mediumship is just the next step in many, many ways, and the data and the physiology data and EEG data seems to support that. But it is just the next step in the sense it's classed as control mediumship. In the sense that what happens there is the medium is seen to be going into an altered state, normally with their eyes closed, and the spirit world is just able to draw that bit closer, as we say. The attunement is that bit finer, as we say, and what happens is the medium will take on maybe the closer persona of the spirit world coming forward and provide evidence or communication of their existence in some form.
And so that's the traditional explanation, but what do you perceive to be different?
I've been with the research I'm doing and the research I have been doing for the last 10 years. You can't help but look at the broader sort of literature on what we call survival of consciousness research, and the survival of consciousness research includes things such as near-death experiences, deathbed visitations, reincarnation, and so forth, as well as mediumship. Because a lot of the researchers out there would say that mediumship alone, though provides evidence of continuation of life, survival, it's actually, if you bring all the bigger picture, the wider perspective together, then you have that real sort of strong case for the survival of consciousness, So mediumship on its own, maybe not. Near-death experiences, provide evidence for survival. But as they're on their own, probably not conclusive. The same as deathbed visitations provide evidence of continuation of life, but on their own, not. But if you put it all together, the evidence of the bigger package with mediumship and everything else put together, then there is this sort of big body of knowledge. However, to do that, you then have to say, what is the commonalities here? And when you do that, you start to see that maybe the spiritualist, I call the spiritualist model of how mediumship works, in the sense of, that we take our awareness to the spirit world, and the spirit person draws close to us, or blends with us, or attunes with us, is not necessary. And it also doesn't explain these other forms of medium, other forms of phenomena that we see as well. And so it seems to suggest there is another, how do I put this? There is another mechanism there's another mechanism in play, what I think would support mediumship, but also support these other phenomena that we see. And I think, the spiritualist model is a model that gives us a framework of perceiving the spirit world in some way. And it also, remember, spiritualism is a religion, and so it complies with the sort of the religion, or the framework of religion, in that respect as well, in terms of having this spirit world and people being there and so forth. It follows that type of model. But the data that I'm seeing seems to suggest that maybe something else is happening. Watch this space.
Would that suggest then, I'm just picking things at random here, because I have an interest. We interviewed Simon Young a couple of shows back, and he's a researcher. Although he's English, he's based in Italy, but he's into folklore, and he spoke to us about fairy sightings, and very interesting. He's got this kind of whole database of fairy sightings, and people just fill out a sheet of information via his website of what they perceive to be a fairy encounter. And he's got something like 500 encounters, and I think he's getting another 500 together shortly to publish as a free download on his website. And so I kind of get the idea. And then we talk about shadow beings, and you've got these dog men sightings and all sorts of things, that the spiritual world, or the spiritualist thing, is one kind of activity, if you like, where we're literally dialing up, or they're dialing back to us to communicate. But it's almost like, as I spoke to, I gave a talk the other week, and I described to the people in the audience what possibly the fairy beings are. It's almost like that we got a spiritual world, but then there's the wildlife, if you like, that we have in our world, where we see hints of wildlife in our back garden, the fox, the badger, or the rabbit at the end of the garden. And then further out, if we go into a jungle, we might see a tiger or orangutan or whatever it may be. And we realize they're beings, they're living sentient beings, but we can't always communicate with them, but we kind of like observe them, and they observe us, and we might have encounters with them. And I liken the fairy world to something like the wildlife, but in a spiritual dimension. So I'm just wondering if, like, what you're trying to describe is that, you think there's more to it than just the spiritualist model. There's a greater reality beyond those.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I would extend that by saying that when I refer to the spiritualist model, I'm referring also to the mechanics of mediumship, because it's those mechanics of mediumship, in terms of the spirit world blending with our auric field and so forth, that we've all heard about, that I'm now questioning, because I don't necessarily feel that that is necessary, because we have to look at all these other fields that support some sort of survival. Even ESP work, the psychic work and ESP work, seems to suggest that we don't need, for example, when we do psychometry, we talk about, psychometry, someone gives you a pen or an object, well, the question is, do we really need the pen and object to do psychometry? Is there not the ability within us to just have that intention? And this is where we're going. This is what the data seems to suggest, that we are the catalyst for all this the perception that we have. And it's because my whole doctorate is to do with intention and the cognitive processes involved in decision making, awareness, and so forth. The data seems to suggest that there is, as I said, there is this other mechanics involved in mediumship that doesn't necessarily follow the anthropomorphic sort of model of the spirit world in their 3D form coming closer to us and all this sort of thing that is easy for us to imagine, but it's not necessarily what's going on.
Are we being spoon-fed a little bit, maybe, by the spirit world?
I think that, well, is it spoon-fed from the spirit world? I've never heard. To be fair, I've never read anywhere. When you go through the Silver Birch books, White Eagle, all these spirit controls that have been around and given us the philosophy of spiritualism, I've never heard them say a lot of them about the mechanics as such, and I think it's pretty much come from our own sort of perception of what we're perceiving is happening, and it kind of makes sense. It kind of makes sense, and there is a logic to it. But I've learned to realize now that what we perceive and what we think we perceive as a psychologist, what we think we perceive is not always was actually happening. And it is fascinating.
What's your take on this, Chris? Because from my perspective in doing kind of psychic work and mediumistic work, certainly on the psychic level, the conclusion I've come to in how I'm getting the information, putting aside, kind of like the skeptical point of view of cold reading and all that kind of thing, when I get information that I shouldn't know that corroborates as true later on by somebody, for instance, I kind of have the position that maybe there is almost like a psychic internet, like the information is universal, absolutely everywhere, and somehow, and I don't know how, a psychic or intuitive is almost kind of like opening up a browser window and Google in a psychic sense, and kind of like dipping into the information and then pulling the information out of the ether and then bringing it back. Do you think that's?
I think there is a strong argument to support that sort of model. We're talking about. It depends where you come on. You're talking about the Akashic records, or you're talking about the super consciousness. This big super consciousness cloud that we're all tapping into.
Yeah,
and absolutely, why not? Why not? It would explain an awful lot. It would explain an awful lot. It would explain the telepathy. It'll explain, the psychic, how the sort of psychic work. And it doesn't take too much to see that how it may provide us a mechanism to commune with the discarnate personalities, the spirit world. I'm talking about the mechanisms and so forth. I'm not saying we don't survive death. I'm not saying this, these individual personalities aren't existing somewhere. What I'm saying is that the picture, or what we're being told of how to perceive, that mechanism working may not be true. You know what I mean? And I don't think, having this super consciousness, I don't think it's too big a step to then realize, well, perhaps we're doing a similar sort of thing when it comes to the spirit world. Maybe it's not the spirit world coming to us and us coming to them. Maybe it's the fact that we're just dialing up, maybe we're going international. Maybe the super consciousness is the psychic. And now, to go medium, you've got to go the international call and in that way. Because if you think about that, then you can start to see why, you've got precognition and retrocognition and things like that. There's all these types of things that can come to play.
Are you familiar at all with the Seth material by Jane Roberts?
Seth's, yeah. Yeah, I've come across it, yes, but I won't class myself as an expert on that, no.
Yeah, it's just that I think that's the kind of, I don't know, that is where we're heading with this conversation. Seems to suggest that kind of Seth material would be a kind of go-to kind of book or source material to kind of explain a lot of this, I think. Because she was a medium, again, for those that don't know who Seth was or who Jane Roberts was, she was born in the 40s, I think. I'm not exactly sure when she was born. But during the mid-60s to the early 80s, the early 1980s, I think she died in 1984.
Yeah, she did.
She channeled, if for want of a better word, that's a popular American term, channeling, or trance as we call it in the UK. This entity who said, "You can call me Seth," and he basically said, if I recall correctly, he said, "The Seth personality, as you know of me, is a bridge of the greater self that I am." And it's a meeting point, a psychological meeting point, if I remember correctly, of where Jane Roberts had to stretch out to and where he had to stretch down from. And where they met in the middle road, it formed this kind of personality that became the Seth personality. So it was a meeting of minds that then brought through this personification, I think, if I understood it correctly. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. But I think, that the initiator of that was Jane, because, in many respects, and as with the case with all mediumship, the initiator is the medium, and it just comes down to, as I said, the whole field of the research I'm doing seems to suggest that it's all, a lot of this, it comes down to, quite simply, where we place our awareness. It's as simple as that. If you place your awareness onto a pen because someone's picked the pen up last time and you want to sense that, you will get information from that. If you want to take your awareness or take your intention or awareness to the spirit world and say there is a person there, then your attention goes to that. It seems to be as straightforward as that. There's no complicated mechanism as such. It's just down to our ability to move our intention or our awareness to where we want to receive the information or perceive the information that's there.
It's interesting because, there's certain situations I can think of. One example where people did not want to receive a communication, yet they did. So I kind of find it difficult to sort of think why, but these three ladies that I saw at a demonstration, and it was actually these two mediums, these two guys were doing a demo together, and one would come on, do his little 10 minutes of mediumship golf, and the other guy would come on, and it was like that all evening. And at the end of the evening, they said, "Right, that's it. We're out of steam. We're off now. Cheerio. Thanks for coming, everybody." And they walked off the stage. And then one of the guys actually came back on and he said, "I'm sorry, I've got to give another message." And it's for those three ladies sitting at the back row. And he pointed them out, and there was three ladies at the back, probably sort of similar age to each other. I think they were sisters from what I could perceive. And he said, "I've got your father here and he wants to communicate with you." And they all instantly said, "No, we don't want to hear from him." And he said, I know you don't want to hear from him, but he wants to speak to you." And they kept saying, "No, we don't want to hear from him." And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is quite embarrassing, because they really didn't want to hear from him. And they weren't focusing their attention. They didn't really want him. But somehow, I guess he forced himself into the situation. He barged his way in, and he'd been waiting there all night, I guess, to get his message in. And I think he was coming in to say, from what I recollect, he wanted to say sorry to them. And he couldn't move on, I guess, wherever he was. He could not move on without seeking some sort of forgiveness for whatever he had done. And it could have been an abusive relationship. I just don't know what. None of them wanted to hear from him. And so, although they didn't focus their attention, they'd obviously gone there for some reason. Okay. For them to, what's your thoughts on that?
But isn't it interesting, the phraseology and the words you're using there? Because this is something that I find fascinating, is the fact that the way you've conveyed that is that the spirit world came to the medium, in a sense, because that's how it's perceived. You think, but and also, and if you listen to mediums work as I work, a lot of the phraseology we use, a lot of the way we describe things, comes through the assumption that the spirit world are coming to us in this sort of form, and we're being perceived by that in some way. We're perceiving that in some way. So, for example, when I'm working, I'll address your point in a minute, but when I'm working and I'll say, actually, I feel I've got your father here, and I'll say to someone, I've got your father here, he's this. Actually, do I know it's the father, or am I just getting something that's just prompted me to say father? I'm not actually sort of, you know what I mean? I'm not actually seeing the person. I'm just getting a feel of that. But the way I present it is in the sense that your father is here. But actually, all that's happened is I've just had some sort of neurological event that made me say father. And so what you said is that, that the father came. Yeah. Well, what if the father didn't come? What if, instead of that happening, what we had here was a medium that wasn't able to deter his attention away from the spirit world? Because one of the things that we find in our research is one of the abilities that mediums need to develop is the ability to multitask and switch attention. That's a very important faculty. What if that medium wasn't able to switch their attention away from the spirit world? They may have been tired, but they're cognitively exhausted and their mind was still there with the spirit world. What if psychically they felt an impression from the women sitting in the back row, and actually he actually brought forward the father, or he was made aware of the father? So it wasn't the father impressing themselves on it, but the medium was impressed. Do you know what I mean? The medium brought that impression. The same way as we're aware of the energy of a pencil, people touches it, and that is the initiation of the communication. It's not, because again, as I said, it's never as simple as this sort of this direct connection, this direct thing. And there are many things that happen. I mean, I have a background in psychotherapy as well, and so when I see clients in from a psychotherapy perspective, they will tell me one thing because they are insistent this is what's happening, but when you explore it psychologically or through hypnosis or what have you, you find there's all sorts of other underlying sorts of mechanisms and things that are going on in play, and so it is interesting. I mean, I've had a similar experience as well with a person saying they didn't want to hear from the person that I brought forward, but again, when I was doing that, I would say that did that person come through? Was that person there and come through, or was I, as an inexperienced medium, just opened up to everything and just got a sense of somebody's presence that I could link to somebody sitting in the congregation, and so I was bringing that forward. And again, I'm not saying the spirit world aren't there or the spirit world are, we don't have survival, I'm just questioning the mechanics of it, because we do have this sort of idea of this sort of image of the spirit world drawing close to us and blending with us and influencing us. Well, maybe it's not that. Maybe we're just psychometrizing the spirit world.
Although, I mean, you've mentioned this in previous interviews about the cross correspondence with Myers and Laurie Piper. Yeah, which was the three different mediums, one in the United States, one in India, and one in the UK, if I remember right. I can't remember.
Yeah, super conscious.
Yeah. So was that not Myers, Frederick Myers, the late Frederick Myers, who was the scientist or spiritualist? I can't remember what yours now.
I can't remember, but it's all written up on the Psychical Research website for anyone who is interested. Look at the correspondence experiments. It has been criticised since. There has been talk about the individuals involved were not as isolated or as distant as one thought. But again, it all comes down again. I mean, super consciousness can I think explain that in many ways as well. If the medium is, if the the individual is able to open their mind and move their intention to a place or to a source, then why not get that?
It just seems extraordinary that they would pick up something, if that is the case, of course, if it's what is claimed, that they would pick up something from Myers, a part of a poem or a book or something, I can't remember the thing, and then the other lady picks up another sentence of the book, and it's all pieced together. It seems quite an extraordinary feat if they are doing it, and I don't know whether the super consciousness, I'm sure there's a super consciousness probably ticking away in the background like a vast internet generation machine.
I mean, superconscious can explain it, but also, as I'm saying, I'm not saying that there's no spirit communication. I'm just saying that the mechanism of that communication isn't necessary as the spiritualists, we perceive it necessarily. So yes, but again, it would have been initiated by the mediums, not necessarily the spirit world initiated.
It's interesting because there's the Journeys Out of the Body guy. Crikey, I forget his name now. Journeys Out of the Body. Robert Monroe. I don't know if you're aware of him. Robert Monroe. He wrote the book Journeys Out of the Body after he experimented with tape recordings and things of different languages, and it somehow triggered. He believed himself to be able to spontaneously go out of his body in a sort of into spiritual realms and dimensions. So he believed. And he went to different areas. One he thought was an alternative Earth. Others realms that he went to appeared to be possibly a spirit world. And other places he didn't have any idea where he was going to. He just was some alien place of bizarre places. But he said even the spiritualists, if it's the guy I'm thinking of, he said even the spiritualists have got it wrong. He quoted a saying about what they believe to be the case. He says, even the spiritualists, when I've gone over there, even the spiritualists have got it wrong. And I thought that was quite an interesting statement.
So what was his take on what they got wrong and how it really is?
He didn't really specify, except that he made no mention of Indian spirit guides or anything like that. He saw people that had died, like his ex-doctor he saw in a room. He appeared to be a lot younger, and the doctor looked at him in surprise, saying, "What the hell are you doing here?" Like in the spirit world. He even made contact with his deceased wife, not long after she passed, like within a week. And he said that he thought he was, because of his 30 years plus experience of going out of his body, he thought it'd be all sorted for this kind of encounter. But it really was a major trauma to him, actually, encountering his wife on the other side. It just I don't know if it freaked him out. It's not the right word, but it was too much to handle, I think, in a weird way, which is quite extraordinary as well. So, it's definitely a book worth reading. Journeys Out of the Body, More Journeys, and there's a third one, I can't remember the title, which doesn't seem to be as good. That one seems a bit off.
I mean, have you come across the works of Anthony Peake?
Yeah, we interviewed him.
Yeah. So you're familiar with the fact that he's much of the perception that there's multiple universes or multiple sort of dimensions, and the fact that when we pass, what we're actually doing is shifting our awareness to the different dimensions of where we currently exist. And I mean, again, so that again is plausible, and again would follow what I'm saying is the fact that it's actually the medium that is initiating the communication, because it's their awareness of moving their awareness to that source of information. Again, all mediumship, all psychic work is about to do with awareness, and it's interesting that we talk in our development classes about awareness, but then we seem to not really think about, well, what do we actually mean by that? What do we actually imply when we talk about awareness? And we then go on to talk about mediumship and so forth. But it is just literally awareness, It is just awareness of things. And we see that because I was fortunate enough to interview 19 international mediums, well-known mediums. Mediums have been on TV, streamed live, all sorts of things, and talking about their mediumship and how they communicate with the spirit world, and look and see if we could understand the cognitive processes involved and map these cognitive processes to specific sort of what we call executive functions that are used in decision-making, awareness, in terms of memory, in terms of things like that. And we found an immense amount of commonality. And of course, these mediums are from all around the world, around the UK, around the world, they're speak different languages and so forth. Yet there was still this commonality in terms of how they received the spirit world, how they initiated communication with the spirit world, how they maintain that communication with the spirit world, and the importance of certain cognitive abilities. So, for example, the ability to switch their attention, was very important, between the spirit world and in some cases between the spirit world and the recipient. So there's this ability to switch or multitask, as we call it, multitasking abilities. But also the ability to sustain their focus, sustain this dissociative state that we mediums move into, was highly important as well. So there's these cognitive processes, and these processes are all interlinked with the idea, or linked with our ability to be aware, ability to attend to sources of information. And it just seems to strike us that this is what seems to be the core of a lot of this sort of phenomena that we're getting. Comes down to our ability, our attentional ability, our attention to this source.
It's quite a complex thing, actually, isn't it? When the more you dig deeper, the harder the rock becomes to crack.
Yeah. Like I said, I had this lovely idea of where I wanted to end up, this research ending up, and it hasn't gone that route. It's left more. It's leaving me with more questions than it does answers. But I think that is what I think all researchers are meant to do. It's not meant to finish. It's meant to just be something like mediumship is meant to be sort of like a vocation, something you pursue for life, so to speak, and hopefully it has some sort of meaningful impact. And that's why, in essence, what I'm trying to achieve here, is to try and bring some sort of empirical base into the development circle, not to replace the spirit world, the teachers of the spirit world, or so forth, but simply to try and bring some sort of empirical basis in this, because I think if we can, especially in the world we're living in at the moment, is becoming more and more secular. To keep in touch with these the individuals that are coming on, the youngsters, the youth of today. I just think we need to bring some sort of empirical basis to this, to what we do. It's not. I don't think it's good enough to say, we sit in a circle, we maybe say a prayer, we close our eyes, we do a meditation, do a little meditative journey, and hey ho, hopefully something appears. And what we say is the evidence. The evidence is what we say to you, so you have to believe it. I think nowadays, I think the youngsters and the youth want to know why and how, and this is what I'm trying to provide in the research and I'm conducting.
Cool. Right, I think for the minute we'll take a break here on the Paranormal Peep Show. We're talking to Chris Connelly about the science of mediumship and where it's going and the kind of research that he's been doing into it. So join us in a minute on part 2 on the Paranormal Peep Show.
Today's the best day of my life! Woohoo! Listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network.
Join Andy and Neil every month on the Paranormal Peep Show, part of the Paranormal UK Radio Network, for fun, frolics and lots of information about weird stuff, UFOs, ghosts and things that go bump in the night and everything associated with them. Fascinating guests, fascinating talk, fascinating information.
Hi folks, welcome back to the Paranormal Peep Show with myself, Andy, Neil and our guest Chris. Neil, you've got a question apparently.
Yeah, it's a question for Chris. It's one of the ones we've been chewing over during the break. We're talking about trance, and I'm intrigued by trance. And have you ever done trance, Andy, or
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've I've told a few times that I should go in that direction, but I'm a bit of a control freak, and I don't like the idea of completely letting myself go for something.
Yeah, I must admit that's the kind of experiences I had many years ago, back in the late 80s. I was obviously getting into this stuff quite heavily, and I was reading a lot of the Seth material, and I think I found out about the Seth material through this particular book called How to Reach Your Spirit Guides by a lady called Catherine Riddle, if the name is correct. And she, if I recollect, she was a psychologist, and I think she was skeptical in the beginning, but then she went and saw a trance medium who then explained that she could learn how to go into trance. And eventually she started channeling herself. And the very first words that she uttered, she always remembered. And I think it said something like, "We would like to assure you that angels do indeed exist." And that's what she actually said to herself in a trance state. And so what happened to me was that in the book, her own guide, if you want to call it guide, gave instructions in the book how to go into trance and channel your spirit guides. And you had to go through these various processes, one of which was writing out your intentions, i.e., I wish to communicate with a highly evolved soul or spirit guide or something like that. And you'd write it down, every day, and you'd probably say it, like stating your intentions. And the other parts of it was like sitting quietly, and you would meditate, but try and visualize yourself as an empty vessel. This is what they stressed in the book, an empty vessel. And I thought, well, how the hell do I imagine myself as an empty vessel? So the only thing that came to my mind was to imagine myself as a Toby jug with my face on the front of a Toby jug, and it's like a great big empty mug. And whatever it was that was going to take over would climb into this empty Toby jug that was my face on the front and then take over. Now, I wasn't sure if this was right or wrong, but I started to get some results from it, and I started to have some weird sensations in my stomach. And I kept thinking, oh, what's that weird warm sensation I'm getting in my stomach? So I thought, well, can I move that sensation with my mind? And it sort of started to move around my body, this weird sensation. It actually went up to my throat, and I could feel my Adam's apple moving about quite on its own, as if it is like gearing up to speak. And then suddenly I blurted out the words were, there seems to be some confusion with the process required. And it kind of shocked the hell out of me. I think, oh my God, I spoke this, and I wasn't expecting to say that. I was hoping to say something, but I really didn't think it would work. And it bloody well did work. And it's such a shock that it brought me out of this meditative trance state. And then I tried some sort of later exercises. And I always remember, and I think I've said this on the show before, about this lady that used to bring through this Manico spirit guide. And we used to see her once every term in our psychic developing circle. And this Manico spirit guide was supposed to be an African guide. And I always kind of had doubts of whether he was real or not, because he sounded like Fuzzy Bear to me. Do you remember me talking about that one? But I think we spoke to Dr. Ian Rubenstein about this, because he goes, "My name is Manico." And it sounded just like Fuzzy Bear to me. And I tried not to laugh, and I'd look the other way, and I really had doubts about it. But then I got a friend of mine to ask a question of this Manico spirit guide, because one time I couldn't go there, and I'd read in one of the Seth books that he stated that Jesus didn't die on the cross. He was actually switched with another guy, which I thought was an interesting concept. So I thought, oh, well, who would know the answer to that? Well, the Manico spirit guide would obviously know the answer to that one. So I got my friend saying, could you ask this Manico spirit guide if Jesus really did die on the cross? And so she went to the session, and she came back a few days later, and she goes, I asked your question on your behalf. I didn't say your name or anything like that. I just said, oh, Manico, did Jesus die on the cross? And there was a pause, and he goes, hang on a minute. And he went away somewhere, spiritually speaking, and then came back a few minutes later, and he said, we don't know the answer, or it appears we don't know the answer. And I then thought, well, that's it. It's obviously fake then. She's obviously putting on a funny voice, this woman, and the whole thing's, a load of baloney. But then I was still practicing my own trance stuff at this time, and I was expecting to go into trance and pick up what I thought was a Victorian spirit guide, because I've been told I've got this guy called Henry working with me. And instead, I started to see an image of Jesus on the cross from the back, as if I was sitting on his shoulder, and Jesus was out like this, and I was like sitting on his cross, on his shoulder, looking down at Jesus on the cross from like as if I was a parrot on his shoulder. And I thought, what the hell's going on here? And then my voice literally came through as this Manico spirit guide. I was doing the fuzzy bear voice. And it said, and he came through with a lot of force. It said, you were the one that asked the question, it said. And I thought, and then it said, I am Manico. And I thought, oh my God, again, that freaked me out. And I came out of trance. I thought, what the bloody hell's going on there? This Manico's found out that I was the guilty party that asked the question, even though my name wasn't mentioned, and he's tracked me down. And he's taking names, basically, and he's pulled me in for questioning, sort of thing, you know.
What was the answer? That's the important bit.
Well, yeah, I don't know what the answer was in the sense of, you know, Jesus did die on the cross or not. I don't know. Someone died on the cross, I gather. But Manico was hauling me out for it, and I thought he didn't exist. So, Chris, you've just been listening to that. What's your thoughts on that?
What, did Jesus die on the cross?
No. What about Fuzzy Bear?
Well, the thing is with, you know, as with all forms of mediumship, there is a level of us in the communication.
Mm-hmm.
And is it the voice of the spirit world? Possibly, could be. And you know, I'm of the mindset that really the voice that comes through isn't significant. It's the content of the words that are spoken that's important. You know, I know in my early development of trance, you know, that the voice didn't match the communicator, but the voice was remnant of some of the mediums, trance mediums that I respected, that I met. And so I suspect at a very unconscious level, I was emulating something almost as a desire to be right, you know, a desire to sort of like emulate the ones that I respected as mediums, you know, trance mediums. So there's not an intentional thing, but on a very much on an unconscious level. Eventually, as time developed, the voice changed, and now the voice is a bit more, shall we say, normal compared to when it first started. So I don't really really take much notice of the voice when it comes to the trance mediums. It is always the content that I listen to and try to understand. And you know, what I was interested hearing was from yourself, but was from Andrew when he said he's tried a few times, he's done it a few times, but he's never too keen of letting completely go, as if there is an element of submission in some respects. And I find that interesting because the data, the research, the EEG research seems to suggest something very different to that. And as I was saying earlier, you know, it's quite true that when a medium goes into trance, that they are physically relaxed. However, we seem to have this idea that trance mediumship is something different from the mediumship that we are accustomed to in the terms of working on platform and so forth. And if I said to you, you know, if I was to ask you now, for example, or if I was listening, so to speak, you know, if there was to attune to the spirit world, okay, you know, you instantly get a sense, if you're a medium, you instantly get a sense of the presence of the spirit world, a sense of the power of the spirit, the energy of the spirit world, yeah? You might not be aware of a particular communicator, a particular personality, but you get a sense as you talk about this expansion or move our mind into this sort of dissociated state. We get this sense of the spirit world there. And then we sort of like we're aware of the spirit world, and then we're sort of like aware of the waking state of us communicating and talking as you would on platform working. Trance is just an extension of that. It's literally all it is. It's literally just an extension, and that is what the data suggests. When I've measured, so I did some work using sort of EEG equipment with trance mediums, as I said earlier, that I wanted to understand what was going on, because I spent you know, several months sitting there with my eyes closed, thinking, what do I do now? Do you know what I mean? Yes, mate, I'm here. Where do you go? And realizing that what I was doing was I was going into this sort of deep meditative stage where I was trying to sort of get this nothingness. Yeah. And I realized that this nothingness was right. I mean, Silver Birch said about being unconscious that we need a quickening of the mind to communicate through it. If the spirit world want you unconscious, then they would do that, So if you have to be unconscious for trance, then the spirit world would make that happen. But the truth of it is not unconsciousness. There is a quickening of the mind going on, the same sort of quickening that goes on when we're working on platform or doing private sittings and so forth. The only difference is that what happens is when you go into the trance state is you're able to hold a single point of focus. If you hold a single point of focus for long enough, what happens is you then start to be aware, and then you'll start to be aware of the communication, and that's when the trance develops. So when you were talking about that jug, so to speak, you were taking your awareness to a single point of focus. And we know that the areas of the brain related to trance to do with the frontal part, the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex, we call it, that deals specifically with our ability to attend to a focus point, to be able to maintain a focus point. When we're doing a private sitting, we may be aware of the spirit world, but we may be aware of the spirit world maybe in a peripheral sort of sense, because we're very much aware of the recipient and so forth, Whereas when we do the trance, we don't have the recipient as such. We can just focus on that, the spirit world. We can just focus on that point of where the spirit world are. And that's what I did. And the EEG research we see, and again, we have to clarify something else as well here when it comes to mediumship, when it comes to, because we often hear about certain brain waves. You have to go in this brain wave or be alpha or be in the theta states or the delta states or whatever. Unfortunately, the brain doesn't work that way. There is no single state. There is no single brain activity. When we talk about brainwave activity, we talk not just the brain wave, but also the structure involved, because the brain activity and the structure tells us a little bit. So you don't have this whole brain going into one sort of state. You know what I mean? It's more to do with where the activity is occurring in the brain, as opposed to necessarily the brain activity going on. But what we see is that when someone is working mediumistically, doing a private sitting, for example, we start to see a growing increase in activity on the right side of the brain. Okay, so the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere stays where it is. It's not as if there's a decrease as much, but we see more activity on the right side. When someone goes into trance, what we actually see is a bigger difference between left and right. So we see more activity, and not just more activity on the right side, but we also seem to see more consistent activity. It seems to suggest that the medium's able to maintain that. And I think it's that maintenance of being aware of the spirit world that brings forth that trance communication. Do you know what I mean? Where, when you're doing mental medium or perception mediumship, doing a private sitting or what have you, you're constantly sort of like being aware of the spirit world, passing the information, being aware of the spirit world, passing. So you're chopping and changing. Your brain's going from one thing to another. Whereas when you're working in trance, you don't actually have, to be fair, you don't really care who's sitting in front of you. Your focus is the spirit world. Your focus is that point. And that point of whether it's the jug or whether it's, whether it's imagining a star in the sky, anything like that, anything that helps you to focus your attention on one spot, but still be aware of the presence of the spirit world, I find is the initiation or the initiator into or facilitates the trance states that we're after. And that seems to be, as I said, supported with what I seem to be seeing with the data that I did many years ago, and I sort of update every once in a while. We do seem to see this shift from activity from the left to the right side of the brain. I'm interested to know, as mediums, are you clairvoyant? Do you see spirit?
Me or Neil, or both?
Both.
I don't. I only get the mental mediumship images in the mind.
Okay. Well, that's what we're talking about clairvoyance. We see the images in the mind. We see those sort of things, yeah. But where do you see them in your mind space? Well, if you imagine a screen, okay, you've got this area here. Where do you see that?
Well, I mean, it's hard because it's a bit like trying to describe where is the dream. But I feel it's like down below me, just here. And sometimes, in the earlier days, I used to feel something over here.
On the right.
A communicator on the right. More on the right. And I remember talking to a guy, a medium, how do you know it's not you or yourself, making it up? He says, that's easy. With myself, I know it's myself thinking this side, but when it's spirit, I feel it this side. And that's interesting because I used to feel it a lot on the right, but now it seems to come down and it appears there, just in front of me, down there somewhere, which is weird.
Yeah, interesting. Andrew, yourself?
Yeah, I think I'd say mind's eye. Weirdly, kind of, if I'm tuning in, I might feel like an energy or something on my left or my right. Yes, I mean, sometimes, occasionally, I've seen orbs of light, and that's been physically in front of me, so not in my mind's eye. It's been kind of like literally there.
But again, first thing first, when you speak to mediums, majority of mediums talk about, if they're clairvoyant, talk about seeing the spirit world, kind of in the front, but on the right side, which seems to be, indicative of being aware of the spirit world in some way. I mean, for me, I know that if I'm working with the spirit world, I just take my attention to this space. I mean, obviously, I'm probably reverse in the camera here, but I take my awareness into this right space here, and just by taking my awareness there and asking the spirit world to draw close, I can start sort of like working with the spirit world in some way. But of course, what you were saying, also is about objective, I suppose in a way, is it objective clairvoyance or subjective clairvoyance is often the term that's often used, but some people saying, I could see the spirit world there with you, almost physically. What we've got to remember is that everything is subjective. Even what we're doing here now, in the psychological neuroscience perspective is subjective, because this is, we are creating an image within our own minds. Based on the sensory inputs that we're getting. So, yes, I just thought that was interesting that, that most mediums talk about the right side, and it's the sort of thing we see. It seems coincidental, perhaps, but we see that with the EEG data as well. It's a movement of data over the right side and the frontal cortex, and down the temporal, which is this side. The ears, so to speak, the temporal side of the hemisphere of the right side of the brain, and this shift between being almost a balance to a left and right dominant hemispheric shift for clairvoyance or mediumship that seems to sort of grow from and seem to get stronger as we go from the perception mediumship to the trance mediumship.
Well, maybe the data isn't there, but I was just wondering about where you go the deep trance state, where people go into a trance to produce the physical phenomena, like materialized spirits. Do you have anything on that?
I don't. I have inquired with a number of physical mediums. None have been too forthcoming in wanting to partake in understanding what's going on neurologically with them, which is a little bit disappointing, but also understandable as well. But as I said, I'm always, I've got this portable EEG equipment, so if there's a physical medium out there listening to us, and wants to partake, then
do you reckon the Kinsellas would, Neil?
Well, Philip might be open to it. The Kinsellas, we mean the twins, Ronnie and Philip Kinsella. They're in Bedfordshire, and Philip is the medium, Philip Kinsella, and Ronnie will. He's many times said, he hasn't got a psychic bone in his body, which is very interesting considering they're twins. Although Ronnie has talked about having certain visions from time to time. He's mentioned those to me, but Philip has been. I think he's been through sort of, I don't know the words tested. He possibly has been tested. Philip's not a physical medium, though, I don't think so. He does mental clairvoyance on stage and stuff, sort of stuff that you would do, and I've done open platform or whatever it is, demos and stuff. I don't think he's a physical medium in the sense of like Helen Duncan would have been or anything like that, producing the ectoplasmic stuff. But I'm sure he'd be willing to be a participant in some tests for future whateevers,
I certainly bear those individuals in mind. And you mentioned something as well that you mentioned about your experience about whether it's my imagination or the spirit world. And there's an interesting study that was published in a couple of years ago, in 2020, I think it was, that was published, where our researchers were looking specifically at that, wanted to see if there was a difference between the electrocortical activity of a medium that was working mediumistically and when they were maybe recalling a memory or using their imagination in some way. And I think they also looked at the meditation as well. So they got a group of mediums together, I think it was about 6 mediums together, and got them to work mediumistically, do a meditation, imagine and tell a story, a fictitious story, so to speak, and look at the brain activity that was going on. And they found clear differences between, and I suppose in a way as mediums, that's no big surprise. But, again, it gives you an illustration that, that there are researchers out there that are open-minded and interested in trying to understand what's going on. But they did find a distinct difference between imagination and mediumship in the other states as well. So they were able to classify that the mediumistic altered state was a distinct state separate from all the other normal waking states. Mm-hmm. So they know that there is something going on. So researchers know there's something going on. We were talking earlier about there is a growing body of evidence supporting mediumship and supporting spiritualism and survival research and so forth. And to a point now where we're actually got one journal that was published in 21, an article published in the journal in 21 that actually clearly stated that, that when you consider the fact that, that these mediums that went through the studies, it was a bit of a meta-analysis. They looked at all the research over the last 20 years to come up with some sort of thing, and then they did their own research as well. And they basically said that, whereas in the past, researchers would often say that there is something interesting going on here, that these mediums are able to obtain anomalistic information about the deceased, but never went as far to say where that information was coming from. They just said, these individuals are able to get this information. We've got journals now, articles in journals now, they're actually saying, look, we have to bite the bullet here. In the sense that when we look at all the other possible explanations of the sources of information, the only logical conclusion can be that not only are mediums able to receive information about deceased people, but the sources of that information are the deceased themselves. So they're actually just saying, look, we can't figure around the bush anymore. We have to be honest and say, that logically, scientifically, if we was to look at all the possible explanations, the one that can explain it more as what mediums are doing is the fact the information is coming from the deceased themselves. And that's actually quite a big statement to have sort of like a peer-reviewed journal and to say that mediumship's real, survival's real.
I wonder how that was received.
Well, this is it. Why then? If this is in peer-reviewed journals and it has got scientific backing, why then have we got people like Chris French and various others saying that it doesn't exist and there's no evidence for it?
Well, there's one. They're not all individuals are not always as well informed as they think they are. So, what's polite, I suppose. Not well informed. And because I was one of the presentations I do is debunking the skeptics, debunking spiritualism, mediumship. It's one of the presentations I do, and and it's very cliche, very easy for scientists to say there's no evidence for it. Because that's what they're taught. There's no evidence for it, and also because there is a massive paradigm shift in science, in scientific understanding. If this is real, you know what I mean. And science doesn't work that way. Science doesn't like big shifts in understanding, because if you think, everything is based on the physical model of the world, the physical model of the universe, the physical model of the body, and so forth. So then you start to say, actually, we've got evidence that there's more than that, that we have this spirit, we have this consciousness, the mind exists after the physical death. There's nothing in science that bridges the two gaps, bridges these two views, and the science doesn't like that.
So we're back to the bias thing again. So
it's not so much bias, it's just the fact the scientific method and science itself, obtaining knowledge, is done through iterative steps. So even though we have this article in this peer-reviewed journal that says that, it is quite appropriate in the scientific community to then go back to this article and say, actually, yes, it is saying that is a conclusion, but, and come up with some other area, because it's just the way that science works. It's not to dismiss anyone's research. It's just the way that a body of knowledge is acquired, and reinforced. So a lot of the studies, for example, studies done with Richard Wiseman and Kieran O'Keefe, did a study back in, I think it was 2008 or 2006, using a technique called the Pratt and Burge technique. And what they did there, they had 5 mediums, and each medium did 5 sittings. And then each sitter received not only their sitting, but the sittings from all the other recipients. And so basically what we call decoy transcripts. They had to judge and grade out of all their transcripts. 5 of them were theirs and 20 wasn't. There'll be 25 in total. Which ones were theirs?
Right.
Weren't theirs. Yeah. Idea being that if the media was evidential and the spirit world was there and such, they should choose their 5 top readings. And what we found was, in most cases, the recipients didn't. And so, I think it said Richard Wiseman and Kieran O'Keefe basically said that they don't ever say there is no such thing as a spirit world. You just say you can support the hypothesis that there is a spirit world or communication. But, so they published that paper, but quite appropriately, other scientists looked at it and found flaws. Flaws in their analysis, flaws in their experimental setup. For example, they got the mediums to come to the university. So they had them sit in the university lab. Most mediums are used to nice comfy chairs and maybe pot plants and a church room and so forth. It's true though, because as mediums training, we don't sit in a sort of like a magnolia room with a two-way mirror or things like that. Cameras looking at us. It's a different environment. And so, a lot of the criticisms to research like that, for example, and not just picking on their research, but research like that, is we ask, is there any ecological validity to it? Does it represent the real world? Is it a real sort of world sort of environment? If it's not, that could have an impact. It could have a factor on what's going on, And so, and this is just a common process in science, in terms of, a paper is published, people criticize it, some people say that's great, let's try and replicate it. and others will just say, well, look, no, that's interesting, but I've got other better things to be doing. It's just the way science works. But the point is that there is a body of literature out there. A lot actually comes from Brazil, because they have spiritism out in Brazil, and they're very much, they have a quite a rich culture in terms of spiritualist or spiritism in that respect. So there's a lot of surgeons, a lot of doctors, a lot of researchers in Brazil coming out with very interesting information. Automatic writing, for example. There was one study that was done by a Brazilian researcher looking at automatic writers. So for those who don't understand, automatic writers are those who go into the trance state, and basically their hand moves and writes the letters or words from the spirit world, so to speak. So the spirit world are controlling the hand or arm or what have you. And what they found is, again, this was they had the medium sit inside a PET scanner. So that's a positronic emission topography. So basically looking at the brain again. And they had these mediums sitting in the scanner, going into trials and writing. And what they found was the areas of the brain that are associated with writing, cognition in terms of written words and so forth, were non-active. So whereas if they were in a normal waking state and writing, these parts of the brain would be active. So it seems to show that in a trance state, or in this automatic writing state, that the areas of the brain that they would have expected to be active in writing weren't active. And of course, that they then leave the paper with the questions saying, well, how are they able to write? Where do they get these words from? And so forth. So there's quite a lot of interesting research that is coming out at the moment. And I've also got, if anyone's interested, perhaps I can provide you with the YouTube channel there. But I've done a series of interviews with scientific researchers to celebrate the International Spiritualist Federation centenary. And there's a series, I think it was 6 or 7 interviews with researchers in survival who talk about where their research is going. And it just gives you an idea that some are supportive, some are not so supportive, some are sitting on the fence. But it just gives you an idea of a feel for what where the literature is, where the research is, where the understanding is at the moment in terms of survival and mediumship.
What would the YouTube channel that be? Can you remember what it's called?
Yeah, it's called the ISF Science Forum.
Okay, cool. We'll look out for that.
Do a search on that ISF Science Forum, and it's a channel that I created with the interviews of the researchers. Excellent.
Do you think there's I mean, I always think that there's like a deliberate kind of dumbing down of this kind of stuff by the establishment, if you like. For instance, our friend Ben does a talk on Helen Duncan, the wartime spiritualist medium who was bringing back dead sailors, saying they sunk on the HMS Barnum, and the British establishment didn't want the public to know about that. So she, according to the idea that she had to be stopped at all costs, and she was taken to the Old Bailey and tried on some trumped-up charges of witchcraft, etc., and put away for the remainder of the war years. And nowhere during the course of the trial was the mention of dead sailors returning from the Barnum to, say they survived the grave and their ship went down. That was never mentioned, because that would point to the fact that she was genuine, and they had to come up with all sorts of trumped up ideas that she was a fake and to put her away. So it's almost like that they know the establishment, certainly the wartime establishment of that period, knew that there was a spirit world, because otherwise they wouldn't be trying to hide it from the British public. Do you think there's a deliberate attempt out there?
In regards to the establishment, I can only speak from the scientific community in the literature and journals and so forth. What I would say, and some of the the complaints and moans that I've heard other researchers who research mediums have, and that they do say it is very difficult to get a paper published in a journal where you're talking about mediums or mediumship and so forth. No, it's very difficult. The paper, for example, that Richard Wiseman, I think Richard Wiseman and Colonel O'Keefe published, was actually in one of the journals of the British Psychological Society. I think it's probably no accident, dare I say, that their findings were that it wasn't supportive. Do you know what I mean? So, and the Journal of the British Psychological Society is quite a main journal, whereas, those that are supportive seem to be within the sort of field of parapsychology, the field of, anomalistic psychology and things like that. So they're like specialist sort of journals in many ways.
Sorry, guys, what do you feel about the concept that in a weird way, and about the Philip experiment, and for listeners who don't know the Philip experiment, in the early 1970s, a group of scientists created a fictional character and then used a Ouija board and seances to try and contact this character, and it turns out that this character was actually then communicating with them, but it was all fiction. It was all coming from their own mind or their own creation. What do you feel about the fact that some people might be how can I put it? If their worldview is that this is all a load of rubbish, they are creating that they are manifesting that as their results. Whereas people who view it that it is real are creating and manifesting that for themselves. So there's kind of like a split in realities kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's with all phenomena that pertains to be spiritualist or mediumistic in nature, there's always an alternative explanation, and that's just the way things go. I mean, for example, we had this ideomotor response, the ability for people to move things without really being conscious of moving things. We had that as in hypnosis. We use the ideomotor response to for the individual's unconscious to signify certain or answer certain questions that the individual may not be consciously aware of, or answers. So there's so things can manifest, and one of the things I'm very conscious of is the fact that there is so much we do not know about the human consciousness, the human psyche, and it is very tricky to be able to find any, where is the line between what is us and what we've done and what maybe the spirit world are doing, and so forth. It is a very great, difficult sort of area to tread and try and define.
So it kind of goes in a really. This is a possibility. I'm not saying this is the case, but a possibility that, in actual fact, when you've got a believer or somebody that believes in the supernatural, their reality is correct for them. And then when you've got like a Chris French or Richard Wiseman who don't believe, their reality is actually correct, but for them, if it's
Absolutely. And there's a famous study, we call that experimenter effect. Whereas an experimenter has this is what I mean. This is why it's such a minefield, because humans are complex individuals, and we're talking about humans in a lot of this thing. Human behavior, human psychology, human beliefs, and so forth. There's a thing called experimenter effect, where those experimenters who are more open-minded to certain sort of phenomena will experience that, are more inclined to experience that, or get more favourable results than those who are more sceptical. There's a famous article, I can't remember the other researcher, but I know again I think this was Richard Wiseman and Marilyn Smith, something like that. I think memory serves me correctly, and someone's probably going to correct me on this, but I think they were looking at the efficacy of spiritual healing. They both did the same experiment together, as I understand it. Both looked at the same data, but both concluded different results, and yet everything was the same. Do you know what I mean? So one was supportive, one wasn't. And it's just down to and other things. As I said, there is, for example, the other aspects of experimental effects might be, for example, how did the researcher greet the medium prior to the experiment? If the person's antagonistic towards the area, maybe they will be off and cold, to the person, or maybe they would try to be warm and friendly, but we know when someone isn't. You know what I mean? We can read through the lines. Whereas someone who's supportive, maybe enthusiastic, maybe open, maybe warm to the medium coming in and sitting down and having a chat and all this sort of thing. So there's a whole host of dynamics involved that can have an influence. And experimental effect is one of that. Again, you've got the confirmation biases of the individuals. You've got a whole host of things. And again, that's just the researcher. Then you've got how does the medium feel? Does the medium like the look of the researcher? Does that have a factor in how they work? Do they like the environment that they're working in? Are they stressed? Have they had a bad day? Did they miss the train? Did they have to run in the rain? There's all sorts of things that can influence, and so there's a whole host of things there, and this is why, for example, why this is such a broad field, and why people may arguably could say that we'll never get to a definitive answer about this, but we will learn an awful lot about what it is to be human. I think the nature of humankind through this type of research. But they do go. I mean, if anyone is interested in joining something like the SBR, they've got a database there going back to 1882. And it's full of literature, talking about the research, of William Russell, Oliver Lodge, all these sort of big players of the Victorian era, and the findings that they had, and it's very hard to come out reading all of that stuff if you've got a very supportive wife that allows you to do nothing but read this sort of stuff, and to come away from that and not conclude that there is a substantial body of evidence supporting survival of physical death.
It's interesting because I've heard you mention in a previous interview about the SPR that they've got their own version of Wikipedia on their pages or something, because Wiki in its own right is very unfavourable towards any psychic or mediumship type of stuff.
That's right. Yeah, they started using Wikipedia initially. And they started getting fed up because you had the guerrilla skeptics that would go and change everything. I think the lines that were supportive and so forth, and some of which allegedly was funded by the late James Randi, who used to donate money to this area of ensuring that these Wikipedia pages reflected certain views, shall we say, and that's what I've understood. I may be wrong there, but that's what I say alleged. But they got so SBR seemed to get so fed up with it that they decided to create their own encyclopedia, SBR encyclopedia, which anyone can go on to and have a look on their website, and it lists it's wonderful resource with research regarding all sorts of phenomena. Not just mediumship, but things to do with ESP experiments and all sorts of things.
Interesting. So I think we'll draw to a close, but if people want to find out more about you, Chris, I know you've done some appearances and things, where can they find out about you and contact you if they need to?
Oh dear. I'm not a great advertiser of the stuff I'm doing, but I do have a website, www.Connelly.info, that people are willing to go to if they want to, and they can find or at least contact me if they have questions.
Okay. Do you have any books or anything in the planning?
I am at the Changing Times next on the 16th, I think it is, 16th of November, where I'll be doing a talk on the science of mediumship and using some technology to measure some brain waves. There's some willing participants in the audience to see, well, first of all, if they've got a brain, but also to see how how things change when they're doing certain different exercises.
Unfortunately, our show goes out after that, but I know that it's good. I know that you got a version of that talk on I think it's the Glastonbury Symposium YouTube channel.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so if they can't get to that because they've missed it, is to look at the sort of same kind of presentation where you're doing this the brain thing on a participant that was meditating, I think, and a brain waves changed or something, which is very interesting. All right, but thank you very, very much indeed, Chris Connelly, for your time, expertise, and presenting us with your research and ideas. It's been a very fascinating hour or two. Any last words, Andy?
No, just thanks for Chris for coming on. And if you did want to join us on the Apollo detectives, that would be fantastic, because I enjoy listening to the scientific angle on things, because the spiritual world and the psychic world can be very kind of airy-fairy and floaty, and it's nice to kind of have a bit of a grounding with it sometimes.
It's not
nuts and bolts
floaty. It's very driven with empirical evidence. Find it. It's got to find it. That's it.
Yeah.
It's more airy-fairy in space because there's no gravity. Less airy, more fairy, maybe. I don't know. Well, thank you, Chris, for joining us. And stay tuned and look out for us next month on the Paranormal Peep Show. Join us for our December show. We'll hopefully have some special guests for that one. Listen out for us on all the podcast platforms and on YouTube. This is Neil Ward and Andy Chaplin and Chris Connelly saying thanks for listening. Good night.
Take care.
You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network, voted #1 for paranormal podcasts in the UK.